At 80 years old, I thought moving in with a stranger was just a way to save money and ease my loneliness. But as the days passed, I began to sense something dark lurking beneath her cheerful smile, a secret that would soon unravel my entire life. Ronald Turner stood outside the small two-story house, the wind tugging at the collar of his worn-out coat. The house was old, its paint chipped and faded, the shutters hanging askew like tired eyes. A single light flickered in the upstairs window, casting a dim glow against the encroaching dusk. Ronald's suitcase felt heavy in his hand, though it contained little more than a few changes of clothes and a framed photograph of his late wife, Miriam. The house belonged to Naomi Wells, a woman he had never met before, but whose ad had been plastered on the bulletin board at the senior center. Room available for rent. Seeking elderly tenant. The ad had read. Affordable. Quiet. Safe. At 80, Ronald had no other options. His pension barely covered the rent at his old apartment, and his only son, Mark, was halfway across the world, too busy with his own life to help. Naomi opened the door, her smile wide and welcoming. She was younger than Ronald had expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with dark, unruly hair and eyes that seemed to dance with energy. She wore a loose, flowery dress and thick woolen socks, despite the mild weather. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice bright and almost too cheerful. Come in, let me help you with that bag." Before Ronald could protest, Naomi took the suitcase from his hand, carrying it effortlessly into the house. Ronald stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim, cluttered interior. The living room was small but cozy, a threadbare sofa, a coffee table stacked with magazines, and walls adorned with framed photographs. But something about those photos made Ronald pause. Each one was a portrait of a different woman, young, pretty, smiling. But each woman's eyes had been scratched out with something sharp, leaving ragged, empty sockets. Naomi followed his gaze and quickly stepped in front of the wall, her smile tightening. "Oh, those," she said, her tone light but forced. "Just some old photos from an art project I did in college. I was going for abstraction." Ronald nodded, though a chill ran down his spine. Art, maybe. But something about those photos felt wrong, deeply wrong. Naomi led Ronald down a narrow hallway, the walls painted a dark, oppressive gray. The air was thick, the scent of mildew and stale coffee hanging heavy. They stopped outside a closed door at the end of the hall. Naomi set the suitcase down and handed Ronald a small, tarnished key. "This is your room," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You'll have privacy. I don't usually come in here. Just, keep it locked when you're not around." Ronald's brow furrowed. "Keep it locked? Why?" Naomi hesitated, her fingers drumming against her thigh. "Oh, you know," she said, her voice too casual. "Sometimes we get raccoons. They've been known to sneak in through the back door." Ronald nodded again, but the explanation didn't sit right. He stepped inside the room, flicking on the overhead light. The room was small but clean. A single bed with a lumpy mattress, a wooden dresser, and a tiny window that looked out onto the backyard. The walls were bare, except for a single painting, a landscape of a dark forest with twisted, gnarled trees. Naomi lingered in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for something. "You'll be comfortable here," she said, her tone a little too bright. "If you need anything, I'll be just down the hall." Ronald nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you." Naomi closed the door behind her, and the house fell into an eerie silence. Ronald exhaled, his shoulders sagging. He dropped onto the bed, the springs groaning beneath his weight, and looked around the room. It felt off. The air was stale, the walls seemed to press in closer, and that painting, those dark, twisted trees, seemed to be watching him. Days passed in a monotonous blur. Naomi was polite, almost overly so, but something about her behavior set Ronald on edge. She was always moving about the house at odd hours, her footsteps creaking across the wooden floors in the middle of the night. Once, Ronald woke to the sound of whispered conversations echoing through the hallway, voices low and urgent. But when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. Naomi's bedroom door was closed, the light beneath it flickering as if someone were pacing inside. The next morning, Naomi acted as if nothing had happened. She poured Ronald a cup of weak, watery coffee and chattered on about the weather, her eyes never quite meeting his. Ronald tried to ask her about the voices he had heard, but Naomi laughed it off. "Oh, that must have been the TV," she said, her smile too wide. "I couldn't sleep, so I watched a movie. Probably just a scary scene. You know how those horror films are." Ronald forced a chuckle, but his unease deepened. Naomi never mentioned owning a TV. One rainy afternoon, Ronald found himself alone in the house. Naomi had mentioned running errands in town and wouldn't be back until evening. Ronald decided to take the opportunity to explore, to get a better sense of the place. He wandered into the living room, his eyes drawn once more to the wall of photographs. The women in the photos all looked strikingly similar: dark hair, delicate features, and eyes that had been cruelly gouged out. Ronald leaned closer, his heart pounding. Some of the women looked familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. But where? Suddenly, he heard a creak behind him. Ronald spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. The hallway was empty. The house was silent. But then he noticed it. A door at the far end of the hall, partially ajar. The door to Naomi's bedroom. Ronald knew he shouldn't. He knew it was wrong, a violation of privacy. But something compelled him forward, a gnawing sense that there was more to Naomi than she let on. He stepped into the hallway, his feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight, but a small table lamp cast a weak, amber glow over the space. Clothes were strewn across the bed, dark, heavy garments that looked like they hadn't been worn in years. A mirror stood against the far wall, and in front of it, Naomi's dresser, its surface cluttered with small trinkets, makeup containers, and photographs. Ronald's breath caught in his throat. The photographs were of the same women he had seen on the wall, the ones with their eyes scratched out. But these photos were intact, the women's eyes staring back at him, wide and terrified. Each photo had a name scrawled beneath it: Anna, Molly, Jessica. Ronald's gaze moved to the mirror. Hanging from the top edge was a single necklace, a delicate silver chain with a small locket. The locket was open, and inside was a photograph of a young girl. Her dark hair framed her innocent face, her eyes bright and hopeful. Ronald's heart lurched. It was Naomi. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ronald's blood ran cold. Naomi was back. He needed to leave. Now. Ronald moved quickly, slipping out of the room and closing the door, just as Naomi's shadow appeared at the end of the hall. She stood there, eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. "What were you doing in there?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. Ronald swallowed, forcing a shaky smile. "I was just looking for the bathroom." Naomi's eyes remained fixed on his, her gaze dark and unblinking. "The bathroom's the other way," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. Ronald nodded, his palms sweaty. Right. My mistake. Naomi stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. You should be careful, Mr. Turner. Some things in this house are better left alone. Ronald swallowed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Because now, he knew one thing for certain. Naomi wasn't the person she appeared to be. And whatever she was hiding in that room was far darker than he had imagined. Ronald sat in his room, his back pressed against the closed door, heart pounding so loudly he was sure Naomi could hear it from the other side. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint creak of floorboards as Naomi moved through the hallway. Each step echoed like a countdown, a steady, ominous rhythm. Ronald's hands trembled as he clutched the armrests of the wooden chair. What he had seen in Naomi's room was still burned into his mind. The photographs of the women, their terrified eyes staring back at him, each of them marked with a name. Anna, Molly, Jessica, and Naomi. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection, that these women had been chosen for a reason. But why? And by whom? Outside his window, the sky had darkened, and rain began to pour in thick, heavy sheets, drumming against the glass like 1,000 anxious fingers. Ronald leaned forward, peering through the slats of the blinds. The backyard was a muddy expanse, littered with overgrown weeds and forgotten debris. A single light flickered from the garden shed, a place Ronald had never seen Naomi enter. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed through the door. Ronald's breath caught in his throat. He remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the doorknob as it slowly twisted. The door creaked open, revealing Naomi's silhouette. She stood there, her face half hidden in shadow, eyes dark and empty. "Are you okay, Mr. Turner?" she asked, her voice unnervingly calm. Ronald forced a weak smile, his throat dry. Yes, I'm fine. Just tired." Naomi stepped further into the room, her gaze sweeping over him. "You look pale. Are you feeling sick?" Ronald swallowed, his fingers digging into the armrests. "Just a little under the weather." Naomi's lips curved into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I made some tea," she said, holding up a steaming mug. "Chamomile. It's good for calming the nerves." Ronald stared at the mug, his stomach churning. The scent of chamomile filled the room, sweet and almost cloying. He remembered the photographs, the names, and the way Naomi's eyes had darkened when she caught him near her room. "Thank you," Ronald said, reaching out with a shaking hand. He took the mug, the heat searing against his palms. "I'll drink it in a bit." Naomi's eyes lingered on him, her expression inscrutable. "I'll be right down the hall," she said, her voice soft. "If you need anything." She turned and left, the door clicking shut behind her. Ronald exhaled, his shoulders slumping. He placed the mug on the nightstand, staring at the swirling steam rising from its surface. Was she watching him? Listening? Was she testing him? Hours passed, and the house remained deathly silent. Ronald couldn't sleep, not with the thought of those photographs haunting him, each name echoing like a warning. He needed answers. He waited until the house was completely dark, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp outside. Ronald crept out of his room, moving as silently as his old legs would allow. The hallway stretched before him, long and shadowy, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Naomi's door was closed, the faint glow of her bedside lamp seeping through the crack beneath it. Ronald held his breath, inching past the door and heading for the kitchen. There, he found the telephone mounted on the wall. It was an old rotary model, yellowed with age, the cord frayed and tangled. Ronald picked up the receiver and dialed the number he had memorized. Mark's number. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Ronald's heart sank. Mark was always busy, too busy to pick up his father's calls, too busy to notice that his father was drowning in fear and uncertainty. He hung up the phone, his hand trembling, and turned to leave. But then, he heard it. A voice. Faint, muffled, coming from Naomi's room. Ronald's spine stiffened. The voice was Naomi's, but it wasn't her usual cheerful, sing-song tone. This voice was deeper, darker, almost guttural. It sounded as if she was talking to someone. But who? Ronald crept back down the hallway, his ears straining to catch every word. As he approached Naomi's door, the voice grew louder. "No, I told you not to come back," Naomi said, her voice trembling. "You promised. You said you'd leave me alone." A pause. Then, a low, raspy whisper. A voice Ronald didn't recognize. "You can't get rid of me. You know that." Ronald's heart hammered against his ribcage. Was someone else in the room? Another tenant? Or was Naomi talking to herself? He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the door. "You took them," Naomi said, her voice breaking. "You made me take them." A strangled laugh echoed through the room. "I didn't make you do anything. You wanted it. You needed it." Ronald's blood ran cold. Who was she talking to? Suddenly, the door swung open. Ronald stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. Naomi stood in the doorway, her hair disheveled, eyes wild and unfocused. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice a mix of desperation and rage. Were you listening?" Ronald opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Naomi's eyes darted around the hallway, as if searching for something, or someone. "You shouldn't be out here," she said, her hands clenching into fists. "It's not safe." Ronald swallowed, his throat dry. "Naomi, I thought I heard someone else in the room." Naomi's eyes flicked to the darkness behind her, and for a moment, her expression crumpled. Fear, pain, confusion all colliding in her gaze. Then, just as quickly, her face went blank. "There's no one here but me," she said flatly. "Just me." Ronald's mind spun. Was she lying? Was she hiding someone? Or was she losing her grip on reality? "Are you sure?" he pressed, his voice shaking. "Because I heard." "You heard nothing," Naomi snapped, her eyes flashing with a sudden, terrifying intensity. "Go back to your room, Mr. Turner. Now." Ronald took a shaky step back, his heart pounding. "I just want to help you, Naomi. If something's wrong." Naomi's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You can't help me," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, hollow whisper. "No one can." And with that, she slammed the door in his face. Ronald stumbled back to his room, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp the doorknob. Once inside, he locked the door and leaned against it, his breaths coming in shallow, rapid gasps. What was happening to Naomi? Was she suffering from some kind of breakdown? Or was there truly someone, or something, else in that room? Ronald's gaze fell on the photograph of Miriam on the nightstand. She stared back at him, her eyes calm and steady. "What do I do?" he whispered, his voice breaking. What do I do? But Miriam, like everyone else in his life, was silent. And outside, the rain continued to pour, the wind howling through the cracks in the window like a mournful, haunting wail. Ronald sat alone in his dimly lit room, the only sound the relentless pounding of rain against the window pane. His mind churned, replaying the chilling exchange he had overheard between Naomi and that other voice. Was it truly someone else in the room? Or was it just Naomi, slipping deeper into some kind of mental abyss? The memory dragged him back decades ago, to a classroom filled with teenagers, the smell of chalk dust heavy in the air. Ronald had been a psychology teacher, a man known for his patience and calm demeanor. One of his students, a girl named Mia Rivers, had caught his attention from the first day. Mia had been a quiet, timid girl with dark, stringy hair and hollow eyes. She rarely spoke in class, often staring blankly out the window as if searching for something, or someone, beyond the glass. Ronald had tried to reach her, gently coaxing her into participating in discussions, but she remained closed off, guarded. One rainy afternoon, much like this one, Ronald had been grading papers when Mia approached his desk. She stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting nervously around the room. "Mr. Turner," she had whispered, her voice barely audible. Ronald looked up, surprised. "Yes, Mia." She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Ronald set down his pen, folding his hands together. "Why do you ask?" Mia's eyes filled with tears. "Because I hear them," she said, her voice breaking. "I hear them all the time, and sometimes they make me do things." Ronald's stomach twisted. "What kind of things, Mia?" Mia's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Bad things," she whispered. "Things I can't control." Now, sitting alone in the darkened room, Ronald shivered. Mia had been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, a condition that caused her to create alternate personalities as a way to cope with severe trauma. One of those personalities, a cold, angry presence named Lila, had been the one to commit acts of violence against Mia's classmates. Ronald still remembered the day Mia was taken away, screaming, thrashing, her eyes wild and unseeing as Lila took over. It had been the last time he had seen her. Mia had been institutionalized, lost to the world, her mind fractured beyond repair. Now, as the rain lashed against the window, Ronald couldn't shake the feeling that he was reliving the past. Naomi's behavior, the strange, disjointed conversations, the sudden shifts in personality, echoed Mia's in a way that made his skin crawl. Was Naomi suffering from the same condition? And if so, who was the voice he had heard through the door? The next morning, Ronald awoke to the sound of Naomi humming softly in the kitchen. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the hallway, a scent that once brought him comfort, but now sent a chill down his spine. He hesitated at the door, ear pressed against the wood, straining to hear. The humming continued, soft, lilting, almost childlike. But there was something else, too. The sound of glass clinking, as if Naomi was washing dishes, or breaking them. Ronald forced himself to step out of the room, his knees weak, heart pounding. The kitchen was a mess, dishes piled high in the sink, coffee spilled across the counter, and Naomi standing with her back to him, staring into the soapy water. "Good morning," Ronald said, his voice tight. Naomi didn't respond. She just kept scrubbing at a plate, her movements mechanical, robotic. The humming continued, and Ronald recognized the tune. A lullaby. A child's lullaby. "Naomi," he said, taking a cautious step forward. Naomi's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto his. The humming stopped abruptly, and her expression went blank. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't hear you." Ronald forced a smile. "Everything okay?" Naomi's gaze drifted to the pile of broken dishes in the sink, her jaw tightening. "Just cleaning up," she said, her voice distant. "Lila made a mess." Ronald's heart skipped a beat. "Lila?" Naomi's eyes flashed, a flicker of something dark and dangerous passing through them. Then, just as quickly, her expression softened, and she smiled brightly. "I mean, I made a mess. I'm so clumsy sometimes." Ronald nodded slowly, his mind racing. Lila. Another name. Another personality? That afternoon, Ronald decided he couldn't stay in the house any longer. He needed answers. He needed to know what was going on with Naomi, and who Lila was. He grabbed his coat and slipped outside, the wind biting against his skin as he made his way to the nearest library. The librarian, a kind, elderly woman named Grace, recognized him immediately. "Ronald Turner, is that you?" Grace said, her eyes crinkling with a warm smile. Ronald forced a weak chuckle. "The one and only." "What brings you here?" Grace asked, leaning over the counter. Ronald hesitated, his mouth dry. "I need to look up someone. Her name is Naomi Wells." Grace's smile faltered. "Naomi Wells? Why does that name sound familiar?" Ronald's pulse quickened. "You've heard of her?" Grace frowned, tapping her chin. "There was an article in the paper a few years back. Something about a young woman found wandering the streets, covered in blood. She claimed she couldn't remember how she got there or what happened." Ronald's hands trembled. "Was her name Naomi Wells?" Grace nodded. "Yes, I believe so. There was talk of her being institutionalized, but I never heard what happened after that." Ronald's mind spun. Was Naomi the same girl from the article? Had she been released too soon? Or had she managed to escape? "Do you have a copy of that article?" Ronald asked, his voice shaking. Grace nodded, her expression serious. "I'll check the archives." Back at the house, the rain had started up again, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of lost souls. Ronald stood at the kitchen window, watching as Naomi paced the backyard, her hair wild, her hands clutching something small and shiny. A knife. Ronald's breath hitched. Naomi stood in the middle of the yard, her head tilted back, eyes closed, rain pouring down her face. She swayed slightly, her lips moving as if in prayer. Then, she opened her eyes and stared straight at the window, straight at Ronald. Ronald stumbled back, his heart hammering. Naomi's face was a mask of rage, her eyes dark, unseeing. And in that moment, Ronald was certain. This wasn't Naomi. This was someone else. Someone darker. Lila. Naomi dropped the knife, her shoulders sagging. Her face crumpled, and she fell to her knees, sobbing. Ronald's heart ached, torn between fear and pity. What was happening to her? Was she truly possessed by another personality, one capable of violence? Ronald stepped away from the window, his pulse racing. The house seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing closer, the air growing heavier. The photographs on the wall seemed to watch him, their gouged-out eyes staring, accusing. He needed to find that article. He needed to know what Naomi, or Lila, had done. Because now, Ronald was certain of one thing. Whatever secret Naomi was hiding, it was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Ronald sat hunched over the library table, the dim yellow light casting harsh shadows across the newspaper clippings spread before him. The scent of musty paper filled his nostrils as he scanned each article, his fingers trembling. The rain outside drummed against the windows, an incessant reminder of the storm brewing both inside and outside of Naomi's house. Grace had been right. The article was there, front-page news from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman found wandering streets, covered in blood, claims memory loss." Ronald's eyes darted over the text, each word sinking like stones in his gut. Naomi Wells, 32, was found disoriented and covered in blood on the corner of Maple and 5th. Witnesses say she appeared confused and unable to recall how she got there. Police investigation revealed the blood was not her own. The source of the blood remains unidentified. Naomi was taken to St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation. Ronald's jaw clenched. The blood wasn't hers. So whose was it? And why hadn't the police been able to identify the source? He continued reading, the next paragraph more disturbing than the last. Neighbors reported hearing screams coming from the Wells residence in the days leading up to the incident. However, no evidence of a struggle or crime scene was discovered. Naomi Wells was released after 2 months of treatment and deemed mentally stable. Ronald's pulse quickened. Mentally stable. Who had made that decision? Because the woman he was living with now was anything but stable. Ronald pushed the papers away, his mind spinning. Naomi had been found wandering the streets, drenched in blood she couldn't explain. And now she was living with him, holding on to a dark secret that was slowly unraveling. He needed to confront her. But how? And what would he say? Ronald arrived back at the house, his rain-soaked coat clinging to his thin frame. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. Ronald's heart thudded against his chest. He took a deep breath, pushing the door open wider. The house was dark, the hallway stretching before him like a tunnel of shadows. A single light flickered in the kitchen, casting long, ominous shapes against the walls. "Naomi?" he called out, his voice echoing through the silence. No answer. Ronald swallowed hard, his gaze darting around the room. The photographs on the wall, the ones with the eyes scratched out, seemed to glare at him, their empty sockets accusing, haunting. He moved cautiously down the hall, each step creaking beneath his weight. The door to Naomi's room was slightly open, and from within, he could hear the faint sound of sobbing. Ronald's hand shook as he pushed the door open. Inside, Naomi sat on the floor, knees drawn up to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes wild and bloodshot. The room was in disarray, clothes strewn across the floor, the mirror shattered, shards of glass glittering like diamonds. In her hand, Naomi clutched the silver locket, the one Ronald had seen hanging from her mirror days before. The locket dangled from her fingers, swinging back and forth like a pendulum. "Naomi?" Ronald said, his voice soft, cautious. Naomi's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment, her gaze was empty, unfocused. But then, her expression shifted, hardening into something darker, something that sent a chill down Ronald's spine. "You shouldn't have come in here," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Ronald took a step back, his heart hammering. "Naomi, I just want to help you." Naomi's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Help me," she echoed, her eyes narrowing. You think you can help me? Ronald swallowed. I know what happened to you 3 years ago. I know about the blood. Naomi's smile vanished, her face going blank. For a moment, the room fell deathly silent. Then, she let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh, a sound that was far too loud, far too jarring. The blood, she said, her head tilting to the side. Oh, that wasn't me, that was Lila. Ronald's stomach churned. Lila? Naomi's eyes gleamed, her pupils dilated. She doesn't like you, you know, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She thinks you're trying to take me away from her. Ronald's hands clenched into fists. Naomi, there is no Lila. It's just you. You need help. Naomi's face contorted, her jaw clenched. You don't understand, she screamed, slamming her fist against the floor. Lila protects me. She keeps me safe. She was the one who made them go away. Ronald's breath caught in his throat. Made who go away? Naomi's eyes filled with tears, her chest heaving. The women, the ones who hurt me, the ones who tried to take my life away. Ronald's mind reeled. The women. The photographs on the wall, the ones with the eyes scratched out. They weren't just random victims. They were women Naomi had known, women she believed had wronged her. And Lila had been the one to exact revenge. Ronald sank onto the floor, his knees weak, his vision blurring. How had he missed it? How had he not seen the signs? He had been here before, with Mia, the girl who had created Lina to protect herself. But he hadn't saved Mia. He had been too late. And now, Naomi was slipping into the same abyss. Naomi, Ronald said, his voice trembling. You need to let Lila go. She's not protecting you. She's hurting you. Naomi's eyes widened, her breathing growing rapid. No, she screamed, her hands clawing at her hair. You can't take her away. She's all I have. Ronald moved closer, his hands outstretched. Naomi, listen to me. You're safe now. You don't need Lila anymore. But Naomi's face twisted into a snarl, and when she spoke again, her voice was no longer her own. It was deeper, colder, a voice filled with malice. You don't know anything, old man, Lila sneered, her lips curling into a cruel grin. You're just like the others. Weak, pathetic. Ronald's blood ran cold. This wasn't Naomi. This was Lila, the dark, vengeful presence that had taken over. What do you want, Lila? Ronald asked, his voice quivering. Lila's eyes glittered with a sinister light. To finish what I started, she said, her gaze dropping to the shattered glass on the floor, to the largest shard, gleaming like a blade. Before Ronald could react, Lila lunged forward, the glass shard in her hand, her eyes wild with fury. Ronald threw up his arms, the sharp edge slicing through his skin, pain searing up his arm. Blood dripped onto the floor, staining the carpet. But Ronald didn't back down. He grabbed Lila's wrists, holding them tight, his eyes locking onto hers. Naomi, he shouted, his voice desperate. Naomi, you can fight her. You can take control. Lila screamed, thrashing against him, her face twisted in rage. But Ronald held firm, his grip unyielding. Naomi, he shouted again. You're stronger than her. Take back control. For a brief, agonizing moment, Lila's face contorted, rage and fear and confusion battling beneath her skin. Then, slowly, her eyes softened, the glass shard slipping from her hand. Naomi collapsed against Ronald's chest, her body shaking with sobs. "Help me," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "Please, help me." Ronald wrapped his arms around her, tears streaming down his face. "I will," he said, his voice cracking. "I promise." But even as he held her, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lila was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Ronald sat slumped in the armchair in the corner of his room, his right arm wrapped in a bandage, the dull throb of pain, a constant reminder of the struggle with Naomi, or rather, with Lila. The house was eerily quiet. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the air hung heavy and still, as if the storm had merely shifted from the sky to within the walls of the house. Naomi was asleep in her room, sedated after the outburst. The nurse from the psychiatric ward had been kind, her eyes full of pity as she helped Naomi onto the bed, her words soft and calm as she reassured Ronald that they would come back tomorrow to assess Naomi's condition. But for now, she was stable, or at least as stable as a woman who had just tried to attack her housemate could be. Ronald leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his head hanging low. The image of Naomi's wild, unseeing eyes as Lila took over haunted him, replaying over and over in his mind. The darkness in her voice, the venomous sneer, it was as though Lila had been waiting all along, biding her time until the moment she could fully take control. He couldn't help but think of Mia, the girl he had failed to save. Mia, who had once been so sweet, so gentle, until Lina emerged, consuming her like a shadow that devoured the sun. Lina had been Mia's protector, her dark avenger. But in the end, Lina had become the very thing that destroyed her. And now, Lila was Naomi's Lina. The next morning, Ronald awoke to the sound of voices. Two men in dark suits stood in the hallway, their expressions grim. The older of the two extended a hand. "Mr. Turner, I'm Detective Harris. This is my partner, Detective Lee. We'd like to speak with you about Naomi Wells." Ronald's heart sank. "Is she... Did something happen?" Detective Harris nodded. "We've been informed by the psychiatric ward that Naomi's condition has worsened. She's been admitted for a full psychiatric evaluation. But there's more." Ronald's pulse quickened. More. Detective Lee pulled a photograph from his coat pocket and handed it to Ronald. It was a picture of a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes. Eyes that Ronald recognized immediately. "It's Anna," Ronald whispered. Detective Lee nodded. "Anna Lopez. She went missing 2 years ago. Last seen with Naomi Wells." Ronald's hands shook as he handed the photo back. "I saw her picture in Naomi's room. There were others too. Molly, Jessica." Detective Harris's jaw tightened. "We found those photographs as well. But it's not just photos, Mr. Turner. We found bloodstains in the basement. They match Anna's DNA." Ronald's stomach churned. The basement. A place he had never dared to go. Naomi had always kept it locked, claiming it was just for storage. But now, Ronald couldn't shake the feeling that he had been living above a graveyard of secrets. "Was it Lila?" Ronald asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Detective Lee frowned. "Who's Lila?" Ronald swallowed, his throat dry. "She's Naomi's other personality. She said Lila was the one who made them go away." The detectives exchanged a glance, their faces grim. "We need to ask you to come down to the station, Mr. Turner," Detective Harris said. "We need to know everything you know about Naomi Wells and Lila." Hours later, Ronald sat alone in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his eyes fixed on the blank wall in front of him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh, unflattering shadows that only deepened the lines in his tired face. Detective Lee entered the room, a thick folder in hand. He dropped it onto the table, the papers spilling out. Photographs, police reports, psychiatric evaluations. Ronald's eyes caught a glimpse of a black and white photograph. Naomi, sitting on a hospital bed, her wrists bandaged, her eyes staring blankly ahead. "We did some digging," Detective Lee said, taking a seat across from Ronald. Naomi Wells was first institutionalized at age 12, after she attacked her foster sister with a knife. She claimed she was trying to protect herself from Lila. Ronald's jaw clenched. 12. Detective Lee nodded. The foster parents said Naomi had been hearing voices since she was 8. Voices that told her to hurt people. Voices that said they were protecting her. Ronald's heart sank. The timeline was chillingly familiar. Mia had been 12 when Lina first appeared, when the world had started to crumble around her. After the attack on Ana Lopez, Naomi was evaluated and released. Detective Lee continued. The doctors believed she was stable, that Lila was under control. But then Molly and Jessica went missing. Ronald's hands shook. Did they find them? Detective Lee hesitated. Not yet. But we found traces of blood in the basement. We believe it's only a matter of time. Ronald's mind spun, the room tilting around him. Had Naomi, or Lila, killed those women? Had he been living under the same roof as a killer? Back at the house, Ronald sat on the edge of his bed, the rain tapping against the window like impatient fingers. The house was silent now, an oppressive, suffocating silence that pressed down on him from every direction. He glanced at the door to Naomi's room, the room that now felt like a black hole, a void of darkness and secrets. The police had taken everything, the photographs, the bloody knife, the locket with the girl's picture. But they had left behind the lingering scent of Naomi's perfume, a haunting reminder of the woman who had once smiled so brightly, who had once tried so hard to be normal. Ronald stood up, his legs shaky, and walked to the room. The door creaked open, revealing the bare, empty space. The bed was stripped, the walls blank. But on the floor, half hidden beneath the dresser, something gleamed. Ronald knelt down, his knees protesting, and pulled it out. It was the silver locket, the one Naomi had clutched so tightly during her breakdown. The clasp was broken, and the photograph inside was missing. Ronald's fingers tightened around the locket. Lila was still here, maybe not in the flesh, but in spirit. The darkness that had consumed Naomi hadn't left. It lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. He rose to his feet, staring at his own reflection in the cracked mirror. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, his shoulders stooped. For a moment, he thought he saw Lila standing behind him, her dark, cruel eyes gleaming. But when he blinked, she was gone. Ronald closed the locket, slipping it into his pocket. The house was empty now, but it was far from silent. Naomi's whispers still echoed through the halls, and somewhere in the darkness, Lila still lingered, waiting, watching, biding her time. Ronald turned off the light and walked out, closing the door behind him. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, the world shrouded in fog. But the fog in his mind remained, a thick, suffocating haze of unanswered questions and lingering fears. As he walked away from the house, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a single haunting whisper. "You can't get rid of me, Mr. Turner. I'm still here,